In the frozen mountains of the Caucasus, 90,000 men began a winter march that would become a graveyard. By the time it ended, fewer than 20,000 would return. This is the story of how one man's ambition buried an empire's army in the snow. By 1914, the Ottoman Empire was dying, slowly, visibly, and everyone knew it. For centuries, it had ruled from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia. But now, the empire was broken, economically exhausted, militarily outdated, politically fractured. Foreign banks controlled its finances. Great powers circled like vultures, carving pieces of Ottoman land in backroom deals. They called it the sick man of Europe. And they weren't wrong. The Balkan Wars had been a disaster. Territory lost, prestige shattered, ethnic tensions boiling. The Young Turks, military officers who'd seized power in a revolution, knew the empire needed protection. They needed an ally. First, they turned to Britain. The Ottomans had even ordered 2 modern dreadnoughts from British shipyards, symbols of a new, powerful navy. But when war broke out in Europe, Britain seized the ships, just took them. The humiliation burned deep. France? They offered nothing concrete, no guarantees, no protection against the looming Russian threat to the north. That left Germany. And Germany was interested, very interested. To the Germans, the Ottomans weren't a dying empire. They were a strategic weapon. Ottoman entry into the war could open new fronts against Russia in the Caucasus. It could threaten Britain's lifeline, the Suez Canal. And most tantalizing of all, it could inspire Muslim populations under British, French, and Russian rule to rise up in revolt. One man, more than anyone, pushed for the German alliance. Enver Pasha. Young, ambitious, overconfident. Enver had risen to become Minister of War. He admired German efficiency, German discipline, German power. And he believed the Ottoman Empire could reclaim its former glory, if it chose the right side. On August 2, 1914, a secret alliance was signed between the Ottoman Empire and Germany. But the empire wasn't at war yet, not officially. That would change soon. October 1914. 2 German warships, the Goeben and the Breslau, fleeing from the British Mediterranean fleet, suddenly appeared in Ottoman waters. The Ottomans purchased the ships. German sailors stayed aboard, now wearing Ottoman fezes. It was a farce. Everyone knew it. But it gave Enver the tool he needed. On October 29th, without warning, the newly renamed Ottoman fleet, still crewed by Germans, sailed into the Black Sea and bombarded Russian ports. Odessa, Sevastopol, Feodosia. Russia was stunned. Britain and France were furious. By early November, all 3 declared war on the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan, from his palace in Constantinople, proclaimed jihad, holy war. He called on Muslims everywhere, from India to North Africa, to rise against the colonial powers. It was a desperate gamble, hoping religion could ignite rebellion across enemy territories. The Ottoman Empire was now fully committed to the Great War. And almost immediately, things began to go catastrophically wrong. The war would not be fought on one front. It would be fought on many, and on all of them, the Ottomans were unprepared. In early November, Russian forces launched the Bergman offensive, pushing into Ottoman territory. Harsh winter weather, brutal mountain terrain. Both sides took heavy losses in confused, desperate fighting. Neither gained decisive advantage, but the Ottomans were already bleeding. British and Indian troops landed at Fao, at the head of the Persian Gulf. They pushed north, overwhelming Ottoman defenders, and captured Basra by late November. Britain's goal was clear: secure oil fields, control the Gulf, protect routes to India. The Ottomans couldn't stop them. In early December, British Indian forces seized the fortress of Sheikh Said, securing the approaches to the Suez Canal. Another strategic point lost. On every front, the empire was on the defensive, reacting, scrambling, losing ground. But Enver Pasha refused to accept defeat. He had a plan, a bold, decisive strike that would turn everything around. He would lead an offensive himself, and it would be a catastrophe. Enver Pasha looked at the map and saw opportunity. The Russian fortress city of Kars, lost decades ago, could be retaken. If he moved fast, if he caught the Russians off guard, he could crush their forces in the Caucasus, reclaim Ottoman territory, and prove the empire still had teeth. It would be a winter offensive, through mountain passes in sub-zero temperatures, with an army that lacked adequate winter clothing, modern equipment, and sufficient supplies. Enver didn't care. He believed in willpower, in surprise, in the glory of Ottoman arms. On December 22nd, 1914, the offensive began. 90,000 men marched into the frozen Caucasus Mountains, divided into multiple corps. Enver's plan was ambitious, almost Napoleonic. He would flank the Russians, encircle them, destroy them in one decisive blow. But Napoleon, at least, had prepared for winter. Enver had not. From the very start, the campaign was a nightmare. Men trudged through waist-deep snow. Blizzards howled. Temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, entire limbs. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion. Horses froze where they stood. And the supplies? They never arrived. The Russians, commanded by General Yudenich, saw the Ottomans coming. They regrouped. They reinforced. They waited. When the Ottoman forces finally reached their attack positions, weakened, frozen, half-starved, they found the Russians ready. On January 2nd, 1915, the battle reached its climax near the town of Sarikamish. Ottoman forces, hoping for a swift victory, instead walked into prepared Russian defenses. Artillery tore through their ranks. Machine guns cut down waves of attackers. The cold continued its relentless killing. Enver's grand flanking maneuver collapsed. Ottoman corps found themselves isolated, surrounded, and annihilated one by one. Men died not just from bullets, but from cold, disease, exhaustion. By mid-January, it was over. The Ottomans had lost up to 80,000 men, dead, wounded, frozen, or missing. Some estimates put the number even higher. Entire units simply ceased to exist. Russian casualties, far, far lower. The Battle of Sarikamish wasn't just a defeat. It was a self-inflicted disaster, a catastrophe born from one man's arrogance and the empire's desperate gamble. Enver Pasha returned to Constantinople, but not in triumph. The army he'd led into the mountains was gone. Tens of thousands of fathers, sons, brothers, frozen in unmarked graves across the Caucasus. The strategic initiative lost. The Russian front stabilized against the Ottomans. But Enver didn't accept responsibility. Instead, he deflected. He blamed others, and in particular, he blamed Armenians, claiming they had deserted, sabotaged, betrayed the army. It was a lie, but it was a convenient lie. And it fed into paranoia that was already growing within the Young Turk leadership, a paranoia that would soon lead to unimaginable tragedy. 1914 ended not with Ottoman glory, but with grim exhaustion. The empire had entered the war hoping to reclaim its strength. Instead, it had revealed its weakness on every front. In Mesopotamia, the British were advancing. In the Red Sea, strategic positions were lost. And in the Caucasus, the greatest Ottoman army ever assembled for the campaign had been destroyed, not by enemy brilliance, but by hubris, poor planning, and the merciless winter. The war was just beginning, and already the cracks in the empire were widening into chasms. Sarikamish stands as one of the most catastrophic defeats in Ottoman military history, not because the enemy was unstoppable, but because the defeat was avoidable. Enver Pasha had ignored logistics, ignored weather, ignored the limits of his own men. He had gambled with an entire army and lost. But the consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. The defeat deepened the empire's crisis. It shattered morale. It fueled dangerous scapegoating, and it set the stage for even darker chapters ahead. The Ottoman Empire would fight for 4 more years. It would see more battles, more losses, more suffering. But the winter of 1914 to 1915 had already written the beginning of the end. In the frozen Caucasus Mountains, an empire's fate had been sealed in snow. If you found this story compelling, there are countless more forgotten chapters of history waiting to be told. Consider subscribing to explore the battles, decisions, and human stories that shaped our world, often in ways we never learned in school. History isn't just dates and names, it's drama, tragedy, and lessons we're still learning. Thanks for watching.